My world that I want to have a little pride in. My world, and it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say I am what I am.
Good afternoon and welcome to Dublin City FM. You're listening to LGBTQlife with myself, MickFitz, and yes, we are enjoying, I can't say an Indian summer, although I've just said it, we're enjoying a subcontinental summer or something of that nature. But today we're delighted to have as our guest because it's keeping in tune with what we've been discussing for the last 3 weeks. Our guest this week is Dr. Mel Duffy. Mel is a lecturer in the School of Nursing and Human Sciences at DCU up there, and she's a long-standing friend, and welcome back.
Thank you very much. Thank you for it.
Protocol dictates that I should call you Dr. Duffy, but I've only ever known you as Mel, so
then don't. Then call me what you want, but not too early in the morning.
Yeah, well, it's as we say, we're above the yard arm now. So, Mel, you and I, and this is why it's when I decided to do these series of programs for September. One of the names that immediately jumped out at me was yourself. The reason being is that when I looked, it was the 5th anniversary of the 4th TGEU Council meeting that was held up in DCU 5 years ago, and I've said it was a pivotal, a landmark, particularly in the journey for trans rights. You were a pivotal figure in that from the DCU side of it. What's your, shall we say, your recollections of that event and that particular time now?
You know, it was amazing. I remember when Vanessa Lacey said to me that the conference was going to happen, and I just looked at her and said, well, we just have to have it in Dublin. And when I approached my then head of school and said, my dean, and said this is what we would like to do, they were very open. And I find that absolutely amazing, because sometimes you think that institutions are not inclusive. And we've heard so much about it, Irish education, of being lacking inclusivity when it comes to people from lower socioeconomic groupings. But I actually think our institution in particular has an inclusivity notion of the notion that we will transform society, and that's what we were hoping to do. But what I was hoping is to turn around and say, everybody's welcome. It doesn't matter who you are, what you do, who people think you are and who yourself think you are. Everybody's invited onto this campus. And I think it was a celebration. I was amazed with everybody, whether it was the gardeners up to the president, who was 100% behind it. And I found it was a magic weekend. Having said that, I also found Sunday dreadfully painful for a lot of people, because I had a lot of people who came up and said, you knew me as X, today I go out as Y.
That's very interesting.
And that to me was my downer, if you like, because we celebrated people's lives. People were happy on campus. People were able to come and go on campus. There was no issues, no nothing. And Sunday just really showed, you know, there was a schism between a life that wants to be lived and a life that was being lived.
But if I could perhaps just take you on that one, because what struck me at the time, and particularly going back over the videos and the audio recordings that I've got, there was after the first day, Minister Joan Burton created a degree of controversy with her address. And there was a rally, I won't call it a protest, it was a rally in your grounds afterwards. And I've got a piece there from Vanessa Lacey, and she's talking about trans people were, up to that point, relatively invisible. And she was correct there in that sense of the word. And what I was looking back and thinking, if you have a look at the status of trans people then, and that's only 2012, to the status of trans people in 2017, my word, didn't we part the Red Sea?
Absolutely. But it's been just amazing. But I think Irish society has been amazing in the last 5 years. Because I think, on one level, you know, it's something you said just before we came on air, and I'm just thinking, what becomes visible that had, for me, was never visible, is an older population, and we're visible.
Yeah.
And therefore, the next generation will see there is a life to be led, and you can go from being young, knowing who you are, to growing into it into your old age. I think that's fantastic, and I think that happened in that 5 years, and I think so much happened in that 5 years that you look at Lydia Foy. I have to say, you just look at what she's done. You look at Catherine and Anne-Marie, and Louise rather, and you just look at how people put themselves out there for change and enabled others to see you as you are. And I think to do that has to be at a personal cost as well. But it's giving to a community and giving to others who would never have known, who have all these wonderful ideas that, you know, if you're different, you must have horns.
Yeah.
And therefore, to see you in public is to, inverted commas, to dehorn you in a way, that you're normal, you're like everybody else.
Yeah.
And what am I afraid of?
Yeah. It's interesting you should say that, because I originally met trans people in the 80s.
Yes.
And that was in Australia. And I've said this quite openly to people, that almost exclusively the people I met were very working class, and they were almost invariably engaged as sex workers, because they were your parameters in essence.
Yeah.
And then when I came back here and I met, not only did most of the trans people I met were older, they were also very middle class, and rather than what I would call running from something, they were actually embracing something. And that to me was an incredible learning experience in that regard. And do you think Ireland has, to a certain degree, it hasn't had to go through that journey that I've had of saying, there's people who are running from something, to there's people. It seemed like Ireland, when the the gender recognition legislation came in, we accepted it as though it was like a rainy day.
But just go back to 93. We decriminalised homosexuality.
Homosexual acts.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
And then made it equal.
Yeah.
And everybody's sitting around the table going, huh? What did it just do? It's this thing of, well, if we're going to do it, let's do it right.
Yeah.
If we're going to embrace, let's embrace. And let's leave nothing on the table to be revisited. And I think that's what's beautiful about it. And I think there is something that you often hear people talk about for Irish society. There is something inherently honest and decent if you allow it to emerge.
Yeah.
It is when you keep trying to batter it that it becomes problematic.
Yeah.
And all we have to do is look around the world and see how trying to put wedges between people can become quite easy at times.
Yeah.
It's when we decide not to, when we decide to embrace. And I think the other thing that probably has helped us is we are going through a period of looking at ourselves and deciding what do we want to be. And we've done that. We've saw what happened with the Magdalenas. We've saw what happened with the industrial schools. It is not perfect. It has not come out in... We have not gone through it completely in a so-called perfect way that we have embraced and said, and our sorrows have become actions, which isn't really necessary. There's no point in somebody standing up in the dawn and saying, I'm sorry for X, Y, and Z, and having no action to it. We must act upon it. We must embrace, and we must have a basic philosophy. Live and let others live. And if we I go back to, and I come from a Catholic roots, but I go back to one basic tenet. Love thy neighbour as thyself. If you cannot love yourself, how can you love anybody else? And I think that's, if we embrace just that, I don't care whether you accept any other aspect of it, but that to me should be a mantra for all of us within society, irrespective of who we are.
Yeah. I'm going to just jump in there and say, because no, and this will just be a little bit in that sense. I agree with you 100%. However, and this is where my mantra comes from, before JC, It comes from before
Yes.
the Sermon of the
I
Mount. It
understand
comes.
that,
It
yes.
comes from a prophet, not a prophet, but one of what we would call the elders, called Hillel. And what he said was, "That which is hateful to you is hateful to that which is hateful to your neighbour, or hateful to you should be hateful to your neighbour."
Oh, I love it.
Isn't it great?
That is great.
Yeah.
Yes.
In
I
other
might
words-
actually put that on my door next.
Yeah, yeah. Now, what's interesting, and again, I'd be interested to hear your view on this one, is that when we went there on the first day, what we would call the plenary session, I still got lovely photographs of you shaking hands with the minister. We had essentially what we would call the political class represented by Minister John Burton. No disrespect to John in that regard. Now, Catherine Zappone was a senator at the time, and Michael Farrell was the Free Legal Aid Centres, or Free Legal Advice Centres. So I would put them in the activist category. If you have a look at what was said that day, the activist category was what held the day in that sense of the word. Joan was coming up with essentially what I said to Giambroni at the time: she'll give you a political solution. That's what the Gregg report offered. That's what the whole political class was offering. At the end of the day, it was the people who carried the day, was it not?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the legislation that came in is actually something we can be quite proud of.
Oh, I think so. Oh, very definitely. And yes, the activists did hold the day. But I think what Joan did was start a conversation in her own way without realising it. We're prepared to do this. And the activists are saying, well, we're prepared to push you a little further.
Yeah.
And in a way, I find... So for me, I followed her for years. And I always found Joan Burton open. And once she opens something up to you, I think you could move in and encourage her to go further. And I think, even though there was controversy, as we all know there was, but at the end of the day, sure, what's a good conference without controversy?
Oh, yeah.
Because it gets people thinking.
Yeah.
It gets people saying, well, what do I actually want? And if she had come in and everybody was accepting her, I don't know whether we would be where we are, because to turn around and say that doesn't go far enough is people thinking through, where do I want to be? What do I want? And not only, which I think was the beauty, it's not for just us now, it's for the next generation. So there's certain fights that shouldn't be continuing.
Yeah.
There'll always be,
Sure. Yeah.
pushing boundaries.
Yeah, I don't know how you feel about it, but one of the people, and I think is one of the unsung heroes, because I think without this person, it probably wouldn't necessarily have happened when it did and the way it did, and that's Kevin Humphries, because Kevin came in, he replaced Joanna Tuffy there as the decision maker, and I thought Kevin grasped what it was about, because Kevin had no background in any of this at all, and we had. I've heard you have to explain what trans is to radio people, to academics, to politicians. Kevin seemed to grasp it, and I just and I think that shows how important it is to get a politician who can actually think outside the box.
But I think where he comes from, really, and you are right, is being human is being human.
Yeah.
And he doesn't... I think the beauty about him, he didn't have an expectation of what human was.
Yeah. Yeah.
He allows human to evolve.
Yeah.
And I think... And you're right, I was thinking about today, and I was thinking about that 5 years ago, but one of the things that happened after that was I was invited up the country to a radio show to talk about the conference, and this guy started off genuinely asking me, well, what is it? And I'm looking at him going, how do you explain something? And I just started off with him. Who are you? Are you comfortable in who you are? And we actually moved into that, and he was just mesmerised, because questions he's never had to ask himself. And it's this questioning of the self that others do not understand. And I don't mean that in a negative way. But if you've never had to say to yourself, who am I? What am I? I think in a way, that questioning enables you to become whoever you are. But for a lot of us, we never had to do that.
Yeah. Can I just put something to you? And again, I've never really discussed this with other people because I didn't want to make it controversial. But I always look at timing, particularly with politics. And what I noticed, about 10 days before the gender recognition legislation came in, that we all, were so surprised and delighted about, we had an interesting event, and that was on the cover of Vanity Fair. We had Caitlyn Jenner, And then I thought, now, okay, we can have different views about Caitlyn Jenner, but for the first time, this was mainstream. This was a world respected character, because Bruce Jenner had, in my day, he had been a phenomenal athlete. And for somebody like that to come out at that time, I think was just, how can we put it, a good stroke of fortune. And I think when people then in politics saw, hold on, this is not something that's confined to dark rooms and clubs and people with bad wigs and all of that, maybe we need to look at it. And, how important then is, for particularly for minorities, how important is role models from your experience and your academic experience?
I think role models are incredibly important. And I think, but you see, do I like the word role model? No. I think it puts enormous pressure on people to act and behave in ways that people normalise, which becomes problematic. But I suppose in a way, excuse me, one of the things that role modelling does, it points to others that there are people like you, that they're normal, they're part of the fabric of society. And I think what the Jenner thing did, really in a way, that whole thing was, we're everywhere. We're every part of society. And you're right, we're not just in dark corners. We are in dark corners, we like dark corners, so let's leave us with our dark corners and don't be shining lights in too far. But this notion of, here we are, part of who you are. You could be standing beside somebody and not really knowing them and actually seeing people for the first time. And I go back to particularly on RTE and particularly the first interview with a first lesbian on the Late Late Show.
Amazing. They gave her a hard time.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But for me, she was the most incredible person I'd ever seen in my life. And it opened up a whole Pandora's box for me to become who I was and who I am and wherever I'm going in the future. But we've had people like that. We've had horrendous conversations on the Late Late. Particularly, I remember back in the 80s, end of the 80s, early 90s, on the whole HIV/AIDS and how ridiculously horrendous those soapboxes were and what people had to say. But that it was like an endurance test, and that endurance isn't happening anymore. Well, that pain, there are painfulness, but that level of hideous painfulness. But yet in 2015,
what I was going to say, Mel, I say I've been clearly because of my connections and so on and so forth, with family connections, I've been paying a great deal of attention to what I'm calling the Australian opinion poll, because it's not a referendum, you know.
Yes, of course.
The same stuff is coming out there. And I keep going back to saying, look, in 2 weeks' time they'll be telling you you'll be able to marry your dog. Or you may be able to marry your brother. I said, we've all had that. And I said, and once they start saying that, you know you're in the ascendancy.
Yes.
And isn't it strange? I mean, Australia's always considered itself in the vanguard of human rights, and here they are tearing each other apart over what everybody else in the Western world, or in the civilized world, shall we say, sees as just a basic human right. Equality in that regard.
True. And we're putting the US in that at the moment.
Well, they have. They have said they still have same-sex marriage, but they're getting a bit dodgy on the trans rights, aren't they? But one person is.
This ability to hold, and this goes back to role modelling. This ability to hold positions and espouse hate speech. At will. Is hugely problematic. So when you have a role in life, you should use it to the best of your ability for a cohesive element, rather than trying to put wedges between people. And I look at Australia and I look at what's been written, and it is that level of hate and spite for others, which I can never understand. We can disagree. We can have arguments. God damn it, we can have a goddamn good row. But it doesn't mean I hate you.
No.
We shouldn't. That word, that level of emotion towards another, is very, very. Leads to horrors. Leads to the Holocaust. There's your ultimate. And we've seen it over and over again in different countries. But it's choosing groups and it's choosing to hate. I think it's a choice sometimes.
Yeah.
You do choose. You choose to turn around and say horrible things
Yeah.
and continuously hate that person. And once you choose that, then I think you come from a framework.
And
That's
hatred,
very, yeah.
would you agree with me? Hatred is a learned experience. It's
Oh
not-
yes,
yeah.
Like we learn to love, so we have to learn the opposite.
Yeah.
You know, and I always kind of students be used to me saying we're born, we're blobs, and that little beautiful blob becomes whatever you pour into it. You pour love into it, it'll become love. You pour hate into it, it'll become hate, and it's that. As parents, as aunts, uncles, as significant others, friends and all that, you have a huge thing in that little person.
Yeah. About 2 weeks before we got the gender recognition legislation, we had the referendum, and it's interesting. I was listening to a rabbi over the weekend, and he's very disturbed about the Brexit vote. He lives in Britain, and he was trying to rationalise it to himself by saying he loves his country, but he doesn't always love what they do. Now that's an interesting one. But he was saying that what he looked at was how he was proud of his country. Now what I said at the time, and it's very, very interesting because I'm not a nationalist, I don't go for any of that wheeler wall your stuff, or I don't go for the the tears in McGuinness. But the one time I have ever felt proud of this country was the 23rd of May 2015.
Amazing.
It was astonishing. I mean, that to me was the Ireland I always wanted, and I always hoped for. You got an extra bonus out of that because I believe you've since got married. Am I true in that one?
Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Yes,
Oh,
we
well,
did.
mazel tov, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, it
How
was
was
amazing.
that? How did that feel when that people suddenly, if you like, you went from being the marginalised to suddenly people were saying, yes, we are doing,
All I can do is bring you to the day that we got married. It was amazing. But what for me was amazing was that we decided just to do family.
Yeah.
And I always remembered each of my brothers and my sister weddings and knowing I was an outsider.
Yeah.
Knowing that this was something you could never have. That knowing, that living with knowing. And you do grieve. I don't care anybody says. You grieve for what you could never have because of who you are.
Yeah.
But for me, you could never become the norm, I suppose,
Did
in
you
a way.
always want to get married? Or did you, do we get defensive in that sense?
Did I always
saying,
want to
I don't
get
really
married?
want that
I don't-
anyway. But
No, do you know
it's
something?
hurtful, though.
It's hurtful. Did I always want to get married? Well, you see, the problem was I wasn't straight, so it was a bit problematic.
Oh yeah, no. What I'm saying is,
when it came
you
in,
probably
you know
always
what-
wanted to be with the person. You always wanted.
Yes,
you always
I
want to
did.
find a loved one. The
Yes.
status is the public status perhaps being less important.
The public status was less important, but do you know what became important? We're very lucky. We have 3 children, and what became important was them.
Yeah.
And how they saw their family and how they embraced it. Because I remember my eldest, I'd be going out canvassing. Can I come? Can I come? And you
What
knew
age
you
is
couldn't.
what
He's
age
now
is
9. So he wanted to canvass. And I remember saying to him, no, you can't. And it's not that you can't. It was, you never know what you would meet.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so therefore you couldn't, and I wouldn't put in that
Well, he's a
situation.
child, isn't
But the day of the celebration, we were at home together in the kitchen, and it was back to back. Radio, the stations were all on, the TVs were on. They could watch their iPads, but they could not go near a TV in the house because it didn't matter what room you went into. You had to be able to pick it up.
Yeah.
Now, this was my nerdiness.
That's,
And they sat there, their faces, the pure joy.
yeah.
But it wasn't just the marriage. What really for me was the joy was the fact of having a legal status with the children.
Yeah.
And that's something I wouldn't have had.
Yeah. It's interesting. You should again. You've picked up on something that I experienced at the time, because I've always said, Irish culture, we experience a whole range, a gamut
Yes.
of emotions.
Yes.
You know, sorrow, sadness,
Yes.
happiness,
Yes.
fear, all of these things. But generally speaking, joy is something that evades us.
Yes.
But when I was in Dublin Castle, and I was there from, I was actually at the RDS, and it permeated the entire
Yes.
day.
Yes.
This was just collective joy.
Yes.
I had never seen it before, and I've been
Yes.
to lots of pop concerts. I've been to lots of raves.
Yes.
But this was just sheer, organic, unadulterated joy, and we came of age for it.
We did.
Yeah.
And interestingly, I put an Irish flag outside our house that day.
There you go.
That morning, I went up and because Tracy says to me, "You're not putting the pride flag out." And I said, "Well, I really want to put pride there." And I really want. And I said, "Okay, so I won't," because I mean, and she's right in a way to think the children and what may have happened. But I put out the Irish flag because it meant for the first time I was a full member of society.
Yeah.
Our family was a full member of society, and you could embrace that.
We're probably going to run out of time, Mel. I just wanted to get onto one of your areas of, particularly one of your areas of academe, as we say, sexual health. In Ireland, when I was growing up here, if somebody said, if you even mentioned the word sex, it was don't be, you're talking dirty. I mean, bar soap, the whole lot, Now, we had trouble talking about sex. How, now that we've made certain, if you like, significant breakthroughs in terms of how we perceive that whole world, how do we deal with sexual health? Do we find it easy to talk about sexual health? Or is it the generation that's there now? Or do they still have some of the hang-ups that our generation had?
I think every generation will. Because I think one of the beauties about sex, sexuality and health is this whole issue of each generation invents it. And the older generation never knew about it. And I think that's problematic. But I actually do think the notion when we embrace sexuality and the self, then we can talk about health in relation to it. And I think the next generation need more input, and I think I'm very lucky at the moment. I'm working with a team of people and in conjunction with the HSE, we're reviewing the relationship and sexuality education programme. So we're researching that at the moment, and really what the HSE want to do and the Crisis Pregnancy Agency want to do is make it better, make the education better, enable the young people to talk and to be open. But parents find it difficult, and it is difficult, and it's not easy to see your child as a sexual human being, which they are. But if you see your child as a full human being, then you must embrace that as well. And I don't mean must in a sense of pejorative demanding, but the fact is, I think we will. I think we're moving. But I think we have to remove from legislation the notion that you can remove your child from the RSC programme classes.
Just one, we've gone absolutely out of time now, Mel, but I just wanted to run one past you, and that is that do we need people to start being very realistic and very responsible for not only what they do themselves, but potentially the damage they could do to others? And what brought this to mind is I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and he is a sex worker. And he was telling me about when he was young. He was saying the repeat business always came from the people who had the kiddie car in the back seat. In other words, you are potentially putting your wife or partner or whatever in serious risk. Do we need to address that in a big way?
Yes, and that brings me back to a memory of the end of the 80s, early 90s, back to HIV/AIDS, when a friend of mine told me that they were doing the self-help lines, and this man rang in and said, "I have just had sex with, in inverted commas, a prostitute. Would they have given me AIDS?"
Potentially, yeah. But
No, it could have been the other way around as well.
Yes,
they could
absolutely.
have. And that was the problem. The notion was because they were going home, inverted commas, to their wife. So it is personal responsibility, but it's being honest about what you do with yourself and others.
Now, we've barely scraped the surface of your work. We'll have to get you back again.
Thank
but
you
in the
very
meantime,
much.
it has been a delight to have you here today, and wonderful to get you back again.
My world that I want to have a little pride in. My world, and it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say I am.